Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister and asks, does he stand by his statement in Parliament yesterday that, and I quote, "It does seem very, very odd that Fonterra allowed production to carry on and for that infant baby formula to go into the supply chain or into the distribution chain? If so, why?"
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yes, because that is the natural question that the public, overseas customers, ourselves and others will be asking.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does he agree with the characterisation of the chain of events that Fonterra knew that their product could have the dangerous Clostridium botulinum in it, and yet let it be processed into baby formula in Australia, re-imported into New Zealand, put on supermarket shelves, sold to parents and fed to babies, all the while Fonterra knew that it could contain the Clostridium botulinum in it?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no, I'm not sure I would agree with that characterisation. The member is using the word "new", and I think that is the issue. Up until the Wednesday of last week, I don't think Fonterra did know.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr Russel Norman.
Does the Prime Minister agree that once the initial test was done back in March that showed that there was a Clostridium in there, they knew that there was some kind of Clostridium, they just weren't sure whether it was Clostridium botulinum or a different kind of Clostridium?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, firstly, I really can't speak for the company. I don't either have a ministerial responsibility, or secondly, I just don't know what the company knew. I know that something showed up at the tests that they undertook in March, but I don't know exactly what they understood that to mean, and therefore I can't give or offer an opinion about why or whether it was safe for them to carry on with the processes that carried on from there.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr Russel Norman.
Then why did the Minister yesterday say, and he says he stood by this statement, that he thought it was very odd, very, very odd, that Fonterra allowed production to carry on if he's unsure about it?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I do think it's odd, but I can't offer a view on what the company absolutely knew. What I know from what I've seen in the public domain is that in March there was something that showed up in the tests that were undertaken. Now, I can't tell you whether that should have waved lots of red flags or none whatsoever. That's what an inquiry will show us. But I do think it's a bit odd that those tests showed something in March of this year, and yet production carried on.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister have any further information about this issue which the government has not yet made public?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member is asking a very broad-ranging question I can't answer, because I'm sure ministers will have very detailed information about lots of things that wouldn't necessarily travel to my office. But if you're asking me whether I have some really specific germane piece of information which is really should be in the public domain and is not, I haven't been advised of anything of that nature.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister aware of whether Fonterra has breached any regulations in this process?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, no, I'm not aware. I'm aware of the fact that the company has all sorts of legal obligations, as does the regulator, effectively, MPI through food safety. But no, at this stage I'm not aware whether they've breached any of those. That's what an inquiry will one day show.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr Russel Norman.
Is the Prime Minister confident that the regulations that are in place are sufficient, and if he's confident that they are, have any regulations been breached?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think I've covered off the last part in my earlier answer. In terms of the first one, to the best of my knowledge, the laws in this area have proven in the past to be sufficient and have worked. Fonterra has been the world's largest dairy exporter, and you have to say, on balance and on the whole, has had a very strong consumer record and one of high safety standards. So there's no particular reason that something should have showed up, but again, that's what an inquiry will show, whether there's any deficiencies.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister know whether the Ministry of Primary Industries has the processes in place that would have identified this potential contamination had the Australian manufacturer not required Fonterra to test for it?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no, I can't answer that question. I mean, they can obviously apply a test, but they don't apply every test to all sorts. There are all sorts of potential things you could test for. I'm sure MPI have the capacity to do that, but they don't always carry out those tests. My understanding was this test was carried out in Australia because of, or more probability, one of the markets was going to require this test.
Question number 3, David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Prime Minister, does he have